you, Tatiana. So what we're going to do this afternoon, I've got two things for you. First of all, what we're going to do secondly, I'll start with the last thing first, is we're going to do an exercise on what we talked about with me before on the 3 Ps. And we're going to sort of co-create together an ideal situation where to look at the conditions really, experiment with the conditions which bring children's rights alive. So I think you've understood that it's a systemic problem. We can't just talk about participation without all the other rights in place. So we have to put all those in place. So we'll do that together and we'll work in groups. But before that, I want to show you a short film that illustrates very well that problem between protection and participation and the difficulty of finding the harmony of not being overprotected or being underprotected. And this film was put together by a very good friend of mine in Germany that filmed children about 18 months old. So it's very interesting to look at early childhood in this perspective, because in early childhood, if they have the opportunity to experiment with participation at a very early age, then it does have an effect later on to encourage in a more sophisticated area opinions and ideas. And at a very early age, it's less of a cognitive thing and more of a experimenting with the physical world. So we'll see these children, they're filmed in a way there is no adult intervention. So there's different scenes where you'll see children on their own doing things either together or on their own. And the question I'd like you to ask yourself in your head is, what would you do in this situation? Would you step in? Would you just let things happen? And if you did decide to step in, there's no right or wrong answer. How would you do it? What would you do? What would you say in that particular situation? Or would you just allow the situation to happen? Okay. So is it possible I can, Michael, are these the lights here? I can turn, yeah, I'll do that.
Ich habe mich vor allem mit dem Spiel der Kinder beschäftigt, weil ich sicher war, dass sie gerade im Spiel ihre Fähigkeiten entwickeln. Dann sagt man immer, ja, es ist gut, das fördert die soziale Entwicklung, aber wir haben ganz schnell gemerkt, das ist nicht nur die soziale Entwicklung. Die lernen auch wirklich viel dabei. Wir Erwachsenen sind uns bewusst, dass wir Rechte haben, aber für die Kinder ist das kein Ausdruck, der in ihrer Sprache vorkommt. Aber sie verkörpern Rechte. Ja, also wieder muss man eigentlich den Kindern nur zuschauen, dann sieht man es daran, dass für die Kinder diese Rechte nichts Fremdes sind. Es wird vielleicht gerade bei den Kindern so deutlich, dass Rechte nicht nur etwas ist, um einen Menschen zu schützen, sondern dass sie ihm auch helfen, sein Leben zu genießen. Dass man etwas gewinnt dadurch, dass man sich gegenseitig respektiert. Ich denke, die Kinder haben die schönsten Erlebnisse, dass sie jemand sind, der geachtet wird und Einfluss auf das Geschehen hat, wenn sie in so einer Spielgruppe drinnen stecken, in der sie ihre Wünsche und Vorschläge vorbringen können, wo sie einen Einfluss darauf haben, wie es weitergeht, wenn sie andere überzeugen können, wenn sie sich gemeinsam freuen, dann erleben sie sich als Person. Wir haben manchmal gesagt, die Kinder müssen alles zweimal lernen. Einmal lernen sie es von diesen Erwachsenen, die irgendwie alles wissen und alles glauben, regeln zu können. Und das hört man sich auch an und glaubt auch, vor allem hoffentlich bei seinen Eltern, die man ja auch mag, sie werden schon recht haben. Aber was es wirklich ist, was die sagen, das lernt man erst zusammen mit den anderen Kindern. Es sind oft die Erwachsenen, die die Kinder hindern, weil die Erwachsenen irgendwie eigene Vorstellungen haben über das, was die Kinder tun sollten, was nützlich ist. Die Erwachsenen haben auch Vorstellungen darüber, was schönes Spiel ist. Man kann sich gar nicht vorstellen, dass Kinder nur durch die Belehrung der Eltern oder der Lehrer, Erzieherinnen, all das lernen, was man später mal als Erwachsener braucht. Kinder müssen es sich selber aneignen und genug Raum dafür haben. Im Augenblick diskutiert man sehr viel die Demografie. Es gibt zu wenig Kinder und es löst Ängste aus. Wer zahlt die Renten? Haben wir genug Facharbeiter? Aber wer diese Kinder eigentlich sind, was sie brauchen, das wird dabei immer wieder vergessen. Viele wollen etwas Gutes für die Kinder tun, aber in Wirklichkeit haben sie dann nur den Arbeitsmarkt oder die Wirtschaft im Kopf. Das ist sehr traurig und ich glaube, es rächt sich, denn das schafft kein Klima, in dem Kinder wirklich gedeihen können.
Okay, so these were not professional actors, in case you're thinking. Was that interesting?
They were better than that.
Better than actors. So I wanted to show you that because I think it's a very concrete illustration of that problem between protection and participation. And I'm not saying what should be done and what shouldn't be done, but it's interesting to reflect on that. So maybe if we could have before going on to the exercise, if we could have a quick discussion. So any of your feelings, you can talk about any of the particular scenes or your global idea of it.
So my favorite part is that when the little boy and the little girl fighting for the swing, and then the little boy...
It's two little boys,
yeah,
but anyway. Yeah.
Two little boys,
Yeah.
okay. Two little boys fighting for the swing. I was surprised that the educator or the people out there would not stopping them because
Yeah.
they were start to like pulling hairs.
Yeah.
I think like if I were there, I probably start to intervene. But I found like they can actually solve the problem by themselves. So that's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Talk about yourself. You would intervene. At what moment would you?
When the little boy starts pulling the
Pulling
hair,
his hair.
I
Yeah.
probably cannot
So
stop.
what would you do? What would you do? What would you
I
say?
would just separate them. Say, oh, pulling hair is not okay
Yeah.
in our center.
Yeah.
So yeah, because I don't want anybody to get hurt. And then but I do see that they have the strength to solve the problem by themselves. It's just like as a role of educator, what we should do probably is to ensure that everybody's safe in the center. So the role is a little bit different than the parents.
Yes.
Because the parent maybe they can try to like just closely supervise them to see if they can solve the problem. If they can solve the problem, they don't have to intervene. But like as a role of educator, I feel like, oh, it's probably the time for me to,
I understand.
Yeah.
The only difficulty with that
Yes.
is what we call a moral intervention.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is it's not good to pull the hair, it's not good to fight, which which is our natural reaction to do.
Yes.
But from a learning point of view, it's not necessarily always the best strategy. What might be a better strategy, if we look at it from a Korczakian point of view, or even Montessori or Dewey, or those pedagogues, would be to understand, first of all, to help the child to reflect on what they've done. So why have you got into that state? Why are you frustrated? What's happened for you to get into that state? And to get him to relive the film, if you like, in his head, and start to learn from the experience, if you see what I mean. But I totally understand. What we normally do is come in with this big moral message of saying, it's wrong to pull the hair. And it's very difficult. Parents, to be a parent, you've got that emotional attachment. You see your child's being hurt, you step in. But do you understand the difference? And
Yes.
that's one of the problems. It illustrates that we have the assumption that we know what's going on. It's almost like we don't need to know what's going on in the head of the child, it's obvious. But we don't know the story that's going on inside their heads, Yes?
The slide part,
The what, sorry?
when the child's coming down the slide.
The slide, oh, you mean the kind of,
The
the fireman scene?
No,
at the beginning.
The other
Yeah.
one, the slide.
Yeah.
And
In the beginning.
the slide is obviously probably for older children. So this happened to me this weekend with my child, who's going to be 2, and he went down the slide at a friend's, and it was not, it's kind of like they kind of created the slide, and then he kind of did the same sort of crazy bail and crying, and my husband was with my child, and I was like, you were watching him, right? So I know that I would have been at the bottom of the slide, and actually if I was to do it differently, I would make sure the slide was actually safe for that age group, because I don't think that slide would be, in my personal opinion, appropriate, because a child will get hurt eventually. So my point,
Okay.
I would, if I was there, I would want to step in more in the design phase of how that is being, what kind of equipment.
I understand, and it's very interesting because it illustrates it's such a difficult balance getting it right between overprotecting, underprotect. If I underprotect, my child could get hurt. If I overprotect, it's going to limit the scope to experiment with life, you know. So it's not an easy solution, and I would be the last person to say it has to be done, you know, there's no recipe, it has to be done like this. Yeah.
Also, I think it's cultural because I grew up in France, and even when I go back, I see the way kids are playing, and they're not overwatched like they would be here. Here, as soon as something happens, parents are running after the kid and making sure that everything's okay. And I think that's just the different way of raising kids.
Yeah, there is a cultural difference, but I would say that what's interesting in the film is to how we constantly underestimate the competence of children. You know, I've seen even just that child with the glass bottles. Every time I see that scene, I go, oh, he's going to drop. But you know, putting the what do you call it, the torchon, you know, a towel on here with the hook.
Yeah.
I've seen adults would say, leave it, you know, it's too complicated, I'll do it for you. You know. Of course, with children it takes a lot longer and experimentation and getting it wrong and so on. But you know, that child had incredible dexterity and competence with glass bottles, and you know, that he didn't drop them. So it's very interesting to see how we perceive the capacity of children sometimes in doing things. So.
I want to a little advance the concept of culture, because from my own experience teaching in America, and I came from a very homogeneous culture, right, where I knew what's right, they knew what's right, and we were working on the same cultural kind of grounds. And then I had students from different continents and different cultures. Some would jump, raising the hand, just saying, I have a question to ask. And some would sit so, with the head bent, and I thought maybe she's sleeping. Apparently she was not sleeping, she was very attentive, but in her culture it was not appropriate to raise a hand. So what I'm saying is, if we go to Korczak and think about children as foreigners, then if we bring this whole concept of culture on the adult population, regardless of cultures, and take children as another culture in the same world, but here's a culture of children and a culture of adults, and we don't know this other culture because they have their own laws, they have their own rules, and instead of trying to understand, as we're trying to understand other cultures, traditional cultures, or other languages, we immediately impose our vision. So I'm thinking, if we try to think and look at children as a totally different kind of planet and culture.
Absolutely, yeah, which is what
right?
Korczak basically said.
Yeah, and try to understand this world, which is different from ours, and try to resist our invasions. I'm number one to be guilty for this. Yeah, but just make a few steps backwards and try to think, okay, that's a different culture. I don't know it at all because I forgot how I was as a child, right? So let me go back and try to get it.
Absolutely, and to illustrate that, and to honor Tatiana, the Russian doll, there's a Russian doll in there.
It's called Matryoshka.
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 Anyway, I'll just call it a Russian doll for the time being. But the Russian doll is very interesting because we could assume, and we make assumptions as adults, that that boy who came and took it off, she's called Clara, the little girl, could have lots of different motives, you know, lots of different intentions that we didn't know. So either he could say, well, Clara's getting it all wrong, I'm bigger, stronger, I'll just take it and I'll play with it, I want to play with it. Or he could be saying, I really want to help Clara, I'm an educator, but I'm a certain age and I'm a boy, so my way of educating is a little bit brutal, but you know, it's meaning well. But we don't know what's going through his mind. And we're constantly deciding in our own minds what's happening. So when we do intervene, sometimes we get it wrong, and I would say there is a fair percentage of the times that we do get it wrong. So without understanding that culture and what's going through their mind, it's really difficult.
I just found it interesting that even though there's adults around,
Yeah.
the kids never went to say, I need help, or I need, like,
Yeah.
so even though there's somebody filming and whatever else, like, even when the kid's pulling hair, he's not going to get an adult to help
Yeah.
him.
Yeah.
He's saying, like, I can manage this.
Yeah. Well, it's an institution which is used to doing that, so it's their culture of working with children in that way. But it's not necessarily the same in early childhood everywhere. But anyway, I want to. Yes, sorry, Jane. Yeah.
I think the thing that struck me the most was how much time those children invested in doing what they were doing.
Oh.
And I thought this earlier when we were going through the rights of the child,
Yes.
when he talks about the right to the budget and to their own, that we should add the word the child is allowed or is entitled to their own sense of time.
Absolutely.
Because we're always, come in and hurt because of something else,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
then,
we're rushing
and
children
we
through
destroy their concentration.
Yeah, yeah.
And then we complain 2 years later that they don't know how to concentrate.
They don't have the same perception of time, and it's a problem.
It's so serious.
And I'm going to. But my perception of time right now is I'm going to have to move you on because we have to do that. But I hope you enjoyed watching that film. I just wanted to illustrate, and it's an interesting dilemma. And maybe the only thing I can really say is that if at least we're conscious that if I, overprotect, what are the consequences? And it might have an effect, because we know that the first 5 years are significant. So it could have an effect on their confidence in participating in more cognitive ways of opinions and ideas. So it leads out from there. And if I underprotect, what danger? So it's a question we need to be conscious in our mind. Yeah, just the last one because I need to.
I just wanted to say that there has been some research done in Vancouver looking at sort of the idea of overprotection, and what they found is that in particular in racialized communities, and especially Indigenous communities, families often feel like they need to be even more overprotective, because if children have bruises and other sort of injuries, then they're more likely to be perceived as hurting their children. And
Child abuse. Yeah.
Child abuse, and when it's actually just children playing and engaging. So, like, I think these conversations are really important, but I think given we have to also contextualize it and why some families may not be able to have their children engage in risky play, and that it sometimes privileged families can do certain things that other families cannot do.
Totally. Well, thank you for that, and thank you all of you. What I'd like to do now, moving from there, is I'd like to do this exercise with you now on how we can create an environment where these 3 Ps can come together. So we've got the 3 Ps here. What I'd like to do is to imagine we're creating. We have to have one institution, so 'cause it's difficult to do for all, the family, the hospital, the creche. So we'll take a school. So imagine what would be the ideal school, not what the problems are that we're dealing with on an everyday, but what if we didn't have any barriers, what would be the ideal situation working with these 3 Ps? So in an ideal school, what would be the best provision that we could provide children in the ideal school? What would be a great protective environment, a safe environment for children? And what conditions would work best to help children or to encourage children to participate and feel like they wanted to be part of it? Okay? So what I'm going to do is we'll create 3 groups. And each group, one group will get an orange set of post-its, these are post-its, and take as many as you need, and just write this way, not that way, but this way, and I'll give you some markers, and basically just one idea per post-it. So you could just write 1 word or 2 words, you don't need to write sentences. And if you could, please try and write in capital letters, because it's easier to read, okay, for me anyway. And as many of these on provisions, so that's orange group, okay? And then the same for protection This is sort of a red-pink group. And the yellow one is this yellow? Is participation. Okay? And for each group also, because you're very important people, you get a very, and thanks to Jerry, you get a very big post-it. And here on this one, I'd like each group, you'll just get one of these, but to do a drawing. So, you know, what kind of space or environment or provision, what does protection look like? You could draw symbols or whatever, and an environment where children feel they need to participate, okay? And then I'm just going to ask you to come out and put them there, and then we can look at that, and we can see what the interaction, and probably there are things that will go in one that are already in the other, because that's how it works, okay? Does that make sense? So, to do the groups very quickly, I'll just make the group. Does this come off? Well done. Ka, la, ku. So, ka, repeat after me. Ka, la, ku, ka, la, ku, ka, la, ku, ka, la. Do you want to participate? Cool. Okay, so if all the kas can come together, all the las can come together, and all the kus can come together, just sort of find spaces. And I'll give you the...
Does it matter which one we are?
I'll give you them. I'm going to give them out, yeah.
Does it matter?
Just get into the group and I'll give you them. So hang on. Okay, so which group are you? La la la. So do you have any preference?
Yellow.
Do you want to be provision or protection? Don't mind? So you can be provision. Oh, I'm sorry. Provision. Here, take a pen. And here, do you? Oh, you have one. And your protection. Okay. So I'm going to give you. And this is for your drawing, okay, afterwards.
All capitals? That's what I asked.
So this is for your drawing afterwards. Okay.
I agree, but I don't know.
Let's give this out.
Guys, would you accept me into your group as yours is the smallest in number?
This is for your drawing afterwards, okay? So your provision. So think about space, but also people, attitudes, activities. As much as we can provide, you know, so it's also different types of specialists, everything that we can provide that would make a wonderful environment to learn in, and would respect the rights. Okay, so you're working, yeah, so all the conditions, the attitudes, the things that would make children really want to, being able to, things that, you know, listening to children, confidence building, all sorts of stuff like that. Are you okay, Jerry? Yeah. Sorry, I couldn't hear you before, but I was...
No, I was just sort of mentioning my stance to the adults are usually paid.
Yes. Yeah.
so neutral.
Absolutely.
At age 79.
Yeah. It creates passive adults and aggressive adults. Yeah.
That's another thing.
Yeah.
Aggressiveness as a young age doesn't have no one.
Yeah. Training is a big thing.
Yeah, like maybe like student.
I'm sorry, I should have dressed you like that. That's the next question. Yeah. So what does that say? It's limited. So I mean, that's why I brought up cultural safety. You can't use items. We can't use marks. Totally. And then giving them so this is strategies to help troubleshoot. So that they feel that they accomplish what you want to accomplish. And they have times that they're a lot of times we defer that they're like, oh, instead of not sure exactly what.
You know, I call it a vicious circle, and I've been talking about it all my life as a teacher. Because people don't change teachers. We can't change them. It's a vicious circle. We can't make this. Because
Sorry, from the.
then schools would never change because we
Oh,
have.
I really like that.
So protection becomes,
idea first, so do another,
Yeah.
put it on.
So then maybe provision.
yeah, absolutely.
But I would like to put representation, even if it's also provision, because I think they overlap. And I also think that this what? This is, like, but
I don't know. I think she's coming. No, I think she's.
What about the concept? And I mean,
Rather than like a structure.
I'm not just one,
yeah. How about school leadership?
Yeah, things like that. I love the idea of pieces where they can choose so organized and you can shift it based on.
Let's do two then, out of open concept.
The open concept environment. And do we have to draw it to like a space school construct or call?
I don't know what the
Constructor?
but
And your ideal is you're ready.
Okay.
We started out in like the Tower Center, but then they went for a building and it's like very open concept. They draw the space, representation of the
Decision.
and all kind of circles.
or else
Describe it, yeah.
it's still,
I'm sure the thing about that is as like students change, the teachers change.
so that they're listening.
Stuck.
No,
I love that. And then there's when I think of the classes, even if I'm what are the factors in this? Very different. So engagement. Yeah, one of the things I like greater is that students get to decide. Yeah, but like having children work away as a senior center. Teaches them the world is not right. So instead of it being a top down, you're able to get a lot. So it's where the students get to put more ideas. And even if it's are making it needs to be something that's a leader, or needs to be engaged. We can do
Well, at least not
simple, yeah, we can do simple.
Not when you get to tell them.
We can all just set it.
I'm not picture of
I want to
the
read your children around the course.
That was kind of a long university class, but
not, I don't think they're very similar, but I mean, there's a way that they're not saying looking, but not one. Maybe the middle years programs, but I know that when it comes to that,
Right space, what it was, that structure. It was called sleeping. And you understand, like, the problem, whether it was a personal problem for them. Like, everything was big, or like,
maybe I'll turn it in school.
and then they come and they can say, you know, I have a problem.
there's just
I mean, trying to stay out.
So what I would suggest is while some of you are finishing the writing, at least one of you
Just
could
getting
start
started
to
on
do
that.
one.
So we could do maybe like a circle sheet, but then
I can give you another one.
a dotted circle, you know, do like we did, not a solid line.
Tatiana, can I go over?
It was like the big point, she did. No, it was a different methodology, or like, but it was basically because
So then if I've got to go-
that was too much of that. I love that everybody is on the same height and they can see it's lower, so equity.
So it's like up to 200, where
That actually for me is
there's all children.
their vision.
Teachers are
Broad, but
I know you will.
I'm not listing for basics. The group that can come down to zero, but then like in those times, because it was very clear, this was our activity. We weren't saying we can all three. There's some fluidity there. Because I think that's one of the things that.
or just schools, or just communities in schools, or whole schools, is it just?
The high school, for sure. Because high school
Sounds
is
that idea.
Like 5 different careers.
where people want to go
Yeah,
after.
as the ground.
It's just great. But I think in the elementary and maybe like up to grade 8 or 9, there's a lot more curriculum, especially a lot more flexibility and freedom.
Yeah, I think that thing, yeah, that was initiative too.
Especially
This is a whole playground, but doing more of these like imagination spaces,
the goal
areas
is
of structure, it's a place where
I
I
think
have
it's
that.
university as opposed to another school that I was at.
I mean, fairness, I don't care which grade
That
it
was
is. I like fairness because it's
if you want children in our community.
and so it's not fair.
That's
So then it's like, it's not fair.
Sometimes I'll get a circle once I've got it. We had
Well, and with the video, we wouldn't think that that would probably be respectful.
do like a little
Yeah,
thought
no,
bubble.
maybe that was a more respectful way
And
of
don't
teaching.
forget,
That way, if you come with that philosophy like he's talking about, red line already.
Oh, and this way.
Yeah. Stone, whatever it is.
but I think, yeah, it's like concepts of fairness.
Because that's how it's going.
Because I think all sides of the equation.
Adaptability.
So,
And then I think what
So
we
we're talking
do
about
the same thing.
participation.
I like
No, quick protection.
Protection.
as well. Just being.
So we need a speech. So
Oh, sure, start to upside down.
Doing where I've been doing
A child's block.
But-
So we weren't really thinking through.
all talked about what we
yeah,
want
let's
to
talk
see on
about
that picture
where
and
what
then
we
we
do.
watch
Yeah.
together. Everybody can do a piece.
Well, we do it so abstract that no one will be able to bring us up to the point.
And we've got all these colors.
Yeah.
Well, it's simple. I'm thinking like kitchen having like you say like the plan, but kind of with in sort of like a an idea of that. Like garden. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
So it's
Whatever they would be the same size.
because fully something came out like when you say.
So Rita, why don't you just like to come and put your words up for the time being? And if you don't
Like
go
a
to it.
yard. So rather than a ratio of what to
Or when the children say it's not clear, then, okay, what did you do as a child?
So like, so everybody takes responsibility
Yeah, then
in
it's a
providing
circle.
safety to each other.
basically.
So instead of it being yeah, it's a time of life where more than
Wow,
anything,
you've got a lot.
like thinking of like a chart that this is like for kids to know what's the expectations.
They're trying.
Well,
Well,
Make sure, no. Make sure this. Hold on.
What do you need to graduate?
Do you want to start with your work?
Which is fair.
Yeah.
Which is fair.
Together.
What does the child need to do? Should we do an image of what the child's vision of protection is?
Joey, this would be worth
That's why I put both environments down. And that's, as a parent, that's how I come to it. And as a health nurse, I try to
co-create it.
mitigate
They don't like me
so that my child or other people's children can live as freely and have as much fun and play as possible.
I think you've got enough work.
Now.
Sure.
It's a fun.
Ideal, I also like being able to do that, but the school doesn't need to actually.
Everyone is the same.
Exactly.
What? Well, you know what, this is a good conversation.
So what if we
Protection takes a lot of thinking.
It does, because we're not planning to go.
What else? How about like,
Could you just bring up the post-it? Yeah. Thank you.
for me, for example, given the choice,
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Can I go to that till 2 a.m.? So like natural environment.
So in our school, there should be no cultural thing like cultural thing.
Oh, yes.
Do you take her back?
Yeah, that was excellent. Who was in there? Over there?
It was this group here. Your participation.
Yes.
It's so interesting because immediately I think of protection.
Wow.
Very different way than we were talking about.
So they're both the space for the job.
Yeah. And when, the drawing is coming.
And then the last thing is going to be teaching.
I don't think it has to be where children have to envision
The ones that they think are easy to do.
Yeah,
Yeah.
excellent.
And the red one is for
Okay.
lovely.
Let them
I don't think it's interesting.
Maybe you should change the career.
Yeah, right.
So on the first, it was round one.
Okay, so you just need to finish now your last touch for the driving exam.
What's in the basement, I was rooms for the ambulance where they have like all these pieces.
We're part of something really big, like in America, in Britain, in the continent. Yeah,
Some of these things.
sure, and with the students. With the students, maybe we should keep that. Oh, we will be in another room. Yeah, but we
should
can take them.
photograph
Yeah, we can take them and put them in the room.
what that means.
I think they want us to
So,
yeah, that will be able to protect.
It feels your nephew.
I was in public health nurse. Yeah.
You love him more than your brother.
Public health nurse for many years, like before I became a nurse practitioner. Now I work with kids still, but public health, like go home, tell them things what to do, and now I see like,
Oh, it was still, yeah.
you know, like we go in and we tell people this prescription, and then you see what it actually, you know, how it plays out and who doesn't. It's not like that.
Okay, so if we could just sit down for a minute, and we're going to look at this. Thank you so much. This is looking good. I don't know what it means, but we're going to have a look now at what it means. But there's some great ideas. So what I'm going to ask, if we could start out from the provision. Start out from the provision. Where's the provision group there? Yeah. Would maybe one or two of you, or all of you, can come and just explain to us, just to say orally what's on there. Okay? Could you come out?
Oh, come down?
Yeah, please. So just to explain to us very quickly the words there, why you've chosen them.
So we explain the words first and then the date.
Yes, please.
Okay, so the first one we have is responsive, flexible, because we want our curriculum to be designed by the student. They design what they decide what they want to learn, and then there are like lots of choice for them to make what they want to learn, how they want to learn it. And then
Yeah, so like we centered it basically on choices. That there was choices, and with that comes the responsive and flexible freedom. We started off with more concrete things, like we wanted to have a student-run culinary experience, and that being free. And then alternative seating options, and then we just went into a lot more of what we wanted to provide in terms of, I guess, more intangible things, which was freedom, adaptability, agility, fluidity of not only the curriculum, but also the physical space and just their time, and their use of time. So that's kind of how we came about this. And then in the end, the considerations that we need to provide also was part of it was safety and in two different aspects, which was physical and cultural. Okay. So, yeah.
That's great. Okay. Thank you very much. Good idea. The idea is not necessarily to be exhaustive. We could always add on and add on, but I think there's some great ideas here. And you'll see that they've decided to call these provision, but some of these ideas come into the other two, don't they? You know, that's how it's working.
We wanted to consider your really important statement that without the philosophy, the tools can sometimes be applied in ways that hopefully we didn't intend, so we wanted to make sure the philosophy was there and aligned with the provisions.
Yes, absolutely. I think also spatially it's really important as well that children need space. You know, the physicality of the place has an impact on their willingness to evolve and so on. And sometimes children need their own space within the environment, yeah.
I know one school back in Russia where what they created in every classroom, they had a big piece like a cupboard or something which would split the room into that bigger space and a small space behind which is not seen. They put a wonderful armchair there, and any child, anytime could go there, sit there, relax, do whatever, and have this privacy.
Yeah.
And it worked wonders.
Yeah.
It worked absolutely wonders without doing anything else.
Absolutely. So provision is a big mixture of variety of things, and if we can play around with those, it has a big impact on the quality of our.
And this whole concept of privacy that
Yeah.
the child needs to understand he or she is given it.
Yeah. And Korczak, started with his orphanage, and Tatiana explained that, at the time orphanages were horrible places, a sort of evil, dark, Victorian 19th century type of places that were frightening, and he did, he understood the quality of provision as an important issue. So if we could move on to protection.
May we take
Who are,
pictures?
sorry?
May we take a picture of this?
Of course, yes,
of
yeah.
anything.
They're yours, yeah? Could the protected, are they being too protective? Can they come, Bronwyn, come and enlighten us?
Okay.
You can bring someone else with you to protect you.
All right.
We're all going up.
I think we struggled getting back and forth between all of them.
Yeah,
Jumping
sure.
into things, but cultural safety was one, just around having people feel like they were accepted and safe at school. And this side, maybe do the next one.
So we thought that obviously that the child's voice has to explain what they want and what they mean in terms of protection. So what that means in terms of the built environment, from like having things wheelchair accessible to playgrounds. Is it the natural environment? Is it a built environment? Like what does that look like to ensure that they're safe and protected, whether it's from within the community or within the school. And then for cultural safety, it's to recognize the privilege and power that teachers, administrators, and the folks in positions of power have, and to ensure that their training is addressing issues of cultural safety. So then safety within the school body, but also within the adults that interact with the students.
Teacher training was, I think we were just sort of refocusing teachers on this is a place of learning rather than a place of compliance or a place of instruction, like that strict instruction.
To have parent involvement so that it's not just a sort of utopic sort of experience while at school, but that the parents are also participating, and when children go home, they can also have a similar type of experience in the home environment.
So we sort of thought of, and maybe this is about participation, but school problem solving. So if there's a problem or somebody's not feeling safe at school, bringing people together to talk about that and what's needed to resolve that issue or that problem. I think listening, empathy, compassion, fairness all had to do with sort of creating a space in which people felt that they had a role in not just being protected but protecting others, and that it's a group thing. It's not one person who's supposed to be the safe person or responsible to keep it safe, but everybody is responsible.
And the fairness was that children like to use the word fair. It's not fair, and so that's why we used that word to kind of symbolize potentially how the children would view it.
Right, and the drawing?
We don't really know what it should look like because we're not children, so this is sort of we'll wait and see what the children say, but essentially it's just the natural environment has a lot to offer for children's learning and safety, and for us to consider what that needs to look like in terms of how we interact with and build to make sure, whether it's the communities or the school environment, desks, whatever.
Right, thank you. Does anybody have any comments on that, or anything that they would add on if you weren't in that group about protection? No? Yes.
One of the ideas which was mentioned was teacher training. And we
Yes.
were talking about if we don't change the minds of teachers, nothing would happen. But I want to add to this, if we don't change the minds of professors who are teaching teachers, nothing would happen for sure. So it's a huge circle which puts everybody who is involved into it, and the question is where we start, where we break the vicious circle and start making changes. I guess we break it at every part where we can break it, but to me as a teacher educator, I'm thinking if at a university level we don't understand what's needed, then going down the hill, we need to rely only on very talented and democratic teachers, which is not always the case. And then there's another thing that is school leadership, that is the principals, because usually they are the ones who are doing the job, allowing or not allowing. So it's really a lot of people involved. And I think the easier part, if you wish, are children, because for them it's much easier to say, okay, let's get together, make decisions. And for adults, to give away the power and to say, okay, let's do it together, it's a much more difficult.
Absolutely. And I would just like to add on to that the experience in France is that there is a great deal of negativity. And that children, teachers in general, a lot of them have never left school. So they were children, then they go to teacher training college or whatever, and they become teachers. And if you add on to that, quite a few of them marry between them. So it's a kind of it goes from a generation to a generation. So there's a lot of kind of non-conscious habits which don't always be the best thing. And what's crept into the system is a lot of negativity. In other words, there's a lot of judgment about what's not right and what needs to be corrected. And Bronwyn talks too much in class, and Judith, could you make a bit more effort next term? And all these little comments, which in themselves are not terrible, but it's just the quantity and the frequency of this negativity. And there's a lot of the times they forget the positive aspects and the potential, and so that goes kind of underground, and we forget to congratulate, we forget to say what's good about the person. So once when I was doing a kind of child rights sensitivity course of primary school children, they were about 8 or 9 year olds. At the end of the day, at the end of the afternoon, I asked all the children to take a piece of paper and to choose one of the rights and to do a drawing and then to write the drawing. So I was watching a little girl called Jennifer. Where's Jennifer? Oh, Jennifer there. And she was drawing a self-portrait dressed with as a princess with wings. I never understood why a princess needs wings, but anyway, she had wings and she had this big dress, and it was a really beautiful drawing because you could recognize Jennifer's face. And at the top she wrote, "The right to dress as I want to," which is not in the convention, but I think it was probably a militant statement for her mother, that she was reclaiming, my entitlement to dress as I want to. And the teacher that was in the classroom at the time was overlooking what the kids were doing, and she stopped at Jennifer, and straight away she said, and Jennifer's face was like a sun. She really enjoyed doing this. And the teacher stopped at Jennifer's and she said, "Jennifer, same mistake of wording here, correct." And Jennifer's face was like a dark cloud came over it. And it's a shame. And listen to the difference. If she'd have said to her, "Jennifer, you've got so much talent, it's fantastic what you're doing, well done, congratulations, you really got something good going on there. Jennifer, just read what you've written there." And probably Jennifer would have self-corrected her thing.
Or,
do you understand?
whisper in her ear.
Sorry?
Or whisper in her ear, here's a spelling mistake. Just,
yeah, but Jennifer would have probably found it anyway. Yes. But do you understand? And it's not that the teacher was a bad teacher. It's just that what we have to take into account is what the risk is, that the quantity of these comments which are negative. There's a point where maybe, I hope not, that Jennifer says it's not worth making the effort, because every time I do something, there's always something wrong. And that's where kids start to drop out, they start to find learning uninteresting, and that's where the problems start. So, participation.
Where is our...
You're missing someone.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to come. You too.
Yeah.
You can hide.
Start. So I think we approached this activity much like we would approach participation, which is sort of keeping it open to wherever it needs to go and explore. So a lot of the words that I think we've chosen reflect that, like choices, freedom to explore, diversity, honoring, no time constraints, playfulness, equity, self-confidence, respect, guidance, collaboration, expression, originality, inclusive, creativity, space, opportunity, community, patience, and health. So just thinking about all the words that kind of would come to mind, kind of create an environment that would allow participation to look however it needs to look, but an environment that is inclusive to all children and all people and all the important people in those children's lives.
And for the drawing, we thought about the space and we wanted a space that had no limit, but at the same time a space that would be inclusive. So that's why we have a circle with dots around it, and a multitude of different things that a child could use to play. And
So to be stimulated by
yeah, but they are mostly things that you would find you wouldn't have to bring with you, like for example water, trees, flowers, little insects.
insects. Yeah, I don't normally bring insects with me, but yeah.
No insects, it's the blue one.
Ah,
Imagination.
yes,
Yeah.
that's great. That's great. Yeah, do you want to add on?
No, I think that covers it, yeah.
There's some great, I mean, those are all some of the key, we're looking at the key words here: patience, health, opportunity, space, creativity.
Guidance.
Huh?
Guidance is one that doesn't come up with the others.
I can't hear you. Sorry.
Guidance.
Guidance.
Guidance, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's participation, it needs guidance and learning. Excellent, well done. Thank you. So, the one last thing that I'd like to do, and then I'm going to hand over to Tatiana, but I think what's important is that when we talked about the interdependence, of course there's overlaps, there's things that are in all of them, which is normal. But it's also, I just wanted to illustrate to you that this will not happen without good provision and without protection. And this will be meaningless if it doesn't have an impact in the other direction. Do you follow what I mean? So if we really want to make what we call a rights-based school, or a rights-based leisure, or a rights-based health centre for children, whatever the institution, it's actually bringing this iterative process into play where the rights are actually there. So, and to not fall into the trap of thinking that the only thing that's important is participation. Of course it's the key thing, but to be a rights holder, you need to have provision and protection. So it's the whole of the rights, and that's really one of the key legacies of Korczak, is that he was a global thinker, and he brought into play all the different aspects that you've been working with Tatiana this morning. They all interact together. They're not separate things. So the last thing I'd like to do, does that make sense? The last thing I want to do, help. Oh, they're here. Yeah. I want to give you some smileys. So I want to give each group some smileys. And these are like traffic lights. So I'd like each group to come up to what they've produced there and to put on a green smiley on the ticket that they think is an easy thing to achieve, or something which happens usually in the school environment. An orange one which you think that is something which needs quite a lot more work to do. And a red one if you think this is really there's a lot of obstacles to achieve that particular thing. Does that make sense? And this is your perception, of course. Okay? So if you can just come up group by group, and you need the whole group.
Just for our own thing?
Yeah, just for your own thing, yeah. Which group are you? Is that with, yeah. So I've got, yeah. This is the hardest one, and the orange one is the...
But it's a democratic school that's run
with
Korczak principals, and they're grade 12, so they're 10 to 12, they run a lot of time.
If you need more smileys, I'll put more smileys. Well, sort of the darker orange one then. Yeah, there's a lighter orange and a darker orange.
I think no time constraints would be hard. Yeah. So a mixed structure. Collaboration is hard. Are we picking for each one, or are we just picking just three? Okay, and then one that's kind of medium. Yeah. Is that correct? We just picked three.
No, you can do as many as you want. If you need some more smileys, I'll...
I think collaborations take, because it takes time, space, and discomfort. Yeah. I think. Would you think hard or medium?
So Tatiana, when this is done, we'll just do a quick... I said when this is done, we'll just do a very quick discussion and I'll hand over to you. Okay?
Hard is not green. No.
You okay? Yeah.
Orange on top of that.
Oh, yeah. Because I'm thinking of the public schools in which I don't know any that have them. Right, and all, yeah. Or green and orange, depending on where you want.
Equity would be difficult to achieve. Equity would be red.
Well, if you can't agree, you can put two smileys on them.
That's difficult because life is, everybody is different. Respect should be medium.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. If it's a fun thing,
Playfulness should be easy.
it's not a
It's like similar to time.
Creativity similarly can be challenging.
No time constraints.
In some ways, it depends on how you're looking at it. I think we'll be able to speak to it, so whatever we put. Like, I guess when you said health,
I was thinking like kind of like healthy environment, health accommodations, like yeah, like for them to participate, you have to account for allergies.
that could be an easier aim to meet, no?
I think so. I think that's kind of this is on the harder side, I think. Sure.
Yeah. So I was
Yeah, we do need to be. Choices might be a medium one. Like I feel like to some extent.
and the new curriculum.
You can do a good job, but then like within that, it's always like limited. It's just a good medium.
Freedom to explore is challenging. I think that you have to think about how people explore information and how different ways of knowing and different ways of being is difficult to explore.
Would you put it in the middle or?
For me, I think when I'm thinking about participation and youth and their participation,
Where
I
are
think
we
that
right
there's a
now
lot of
and how much do we
restraint
want
in
to
youth not actually feeling free to explore whether that's
I think it depends on the guidance.
I don't think it is. I think that the guidance actually gets in the way of the freedom to explore. And I think
That's where all we're gonna go.
If you feel free to explore, I think it depends on how you see that. Like for example, when you teach, like when I do drama, if you are in a safe space, then it's easy to explore.
But I think creating that safety for a diverse group of youth is very difficult. Like me as a white person teaching Indigenous students, the freedom to explore may not be there just by the inherent sort of historical issues that are going to interfere in my personhood will interfere. So I think it's actually, and for my ways of thinking, and my ways of communicating, my language, all of those things make it challenging to explore an issue in totality. That's
you want
at
some
least
more?
what I see. Like a child, to explore with a child meaningfully, let's say if they're not just definitely facts. Like I don't think that's as hands-on.
It requires almost total autonomy, right? Which is hard
You want some more? No.
to give.
Do you need more?
I
No.
feel like guidance might get
That's why I think it's one of the most challenging, right? It's easy to guide, but it's hard to get that level of prestige. Because even in a drama classroom, you have constraints that you give the children.
Yes and no, because in my school we have
Don't use too many of those things because
because
they're
the only common
expensive.
thing is language. So we have people from all over the world. So it's very, very mixed and diverse. Different social, cultural status. So it's wonderful that it is.
medium then? That could go both ways.
Don't worry.
Not impossible. Yeah.
We'll get Tatiana to correct you.
The red one?
Yeah. Space should be easy.
I was thinking space more around time constraints, but yeah.
Oh, you were? Okay.
Not just like a physical space. But yes, that would also make sense. Space would be easy to achieve depending on
Physical
how you
space,
conceptualize it.
yeah.
If you conceptualize it that way,
That's
then yeah.
our come out right now.
I agree, like, especially, it shifts so much, depending on age and the constraints based on that.
Honoring.
This needs 2
And it
oranges
just
on it.
seems
I think it goes with respect.
It requires, honoring requires a special intention.
mentally,
I think it goes beyond respect.
providing for them, it's just not a great fit.
I think respect is easier. That is like a natural instinct. Honoring.
Again, it's all that action items
this in my
that are the hard things. Just
I don't know, do we have to know everyone?
No.
fairness. I think originality is easy because everything's original. Just technically given.
Same with creativity.
I don't have any more.
Hey, we're done. Yeah, we're done. We have a lot.
Do we have one in between?
We have choices and freedom to explore. Another in between.
Opportunity.
But that's why we said opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's writing up to you can be quite easy actually.
Oh.
Is it exactly the same? My mom used to be the, you cut, the other person picks. When you're pieces of cake. Because then if you were cutting and the other person picks first, that means you're gonna be as equal as possible.
Okay. Don't worry if you haven't completely finished. Let's go back. We're just going to wrap this up now. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm not I'm not going to ask you to feed back on your smileys. It was more of kind of an exercise to be conscious, really, and it's only a perceptive thing. It's your perception that, you know, not everything is equal, and not everything is that, you know, we can do all this at once, sort of thing. There are obstacles, and we have to recognise, because this is kind of a utopic vision, maybe, and it's not that easy to set up. But it's worth going from that point of view and saying, what can we do? What progress can we make? Where can we start to implement things and build on them and eventually achieve the more difficult ones, you know? And some of them have financial consequences, and those are probably some of the hardest problems to get over. So what I'd like to do is just to finish with some feedback from that experience, from that activity, including the film. If you, how did that, what did you get out of that? What was interesting for you, or what was important, or if anything?
You forget quickly how to be a child.
Uh-huh.
And it's fun to go back into that. Like when I was watching the movie, I could see myself again as a child and
Yes.
being carefree and
Yeah.
trying, not caring about what other people thought.
Yeah, because you can see there are things that children see that we no longer see in their environment, or their interest is our interest is no longer there.
I was thinking, watching the movie, but also thinking about this, that our systems of education and care are so oriented to being risk averse.
Being what?
So risk averse.
Risk averse, yeah.
You know, so the child that was on the ladder, and it was the engine, and he started to rock, was like, you know, so I was thinking or the child that was pulling the other child's hair, that our systems are often very concerned about how they will be perceived if they don't intervene.
Yes.
Same with the child protection system. It's very much like, well, what happens if something goes wrong? Mm-hmm. What if we make a mistake? What if our judgment's not wise?
Yeah.
So because we're driven primarily by a risk aversion, that actually limits a lot of the things that we entertain or we create possibilities for. So that was one thought. It's like, wow, you know, as long as we stay stuck within a risk aversion model, then there will be lots of barriers. All of this makes sense, but there's lots of barriers to implementation.
Absolutely.
The other thing was a question that I had for you, and my mind was immediately going to, probably because it was signaled by the play video, I was thinking about designing an ideal school for little ones.
Yes. Yeah.
But then I was wondering what your experience has been when you introduce these notions or create programs or systems or whatever for children who are in their teens, who might not have had any of this, that might not have had might not have felt listened to, might not have felt engaged, might not have felt like they had choice and whatnot. And then how resilient, I guess, is the child's experience so that they can enter into different kinds of relationships around their rights and their manifestation and how we care for others.
Yeah. Well, it's never over. You know, I mean, it's always a good thing if we think that, you know, that life is a continuum. So if we start off, that's why I wanted to show you the film of young children. But, you know, for children that haven't had those opportunities, and we do quite a lot of work in inner city areas, in difficult suburbs in Paris, where there are quite violent situations and a lot of poverty, and children are in very authoritarian type of environment. But it's really important to look at their potential and create other situations where where teenagers can blossom, if you like. It's not lost, but it's what Tatiana was talking about. We have to start at different levels. We have to start with the teacher trainers, the teachers, and you know, because otherwise it perpetuates, and work with the kids at the same time. So my experience in India, for example, a lot of the children that are Dalit children and tribal children and very poor children and street children, they haven't got the state resources that they can go to get help or to find ways where they can find good environments. So NGOs start to take over. So what normally should be provided by the state, NGOs start to take over. And I've seen NGOs which open their doors every day of the week, including Sunday, because even at home they're not getting good care. So for 2 or 3 hours a day, the kids go to the NGO and they're with benevolent adults and they're creating an environment like this. So I'm working with an NGO which was jointly created by children and adults, and it's called 9 is Mine, because a few years ago the United Nations said to all member states, you need to spend 9% of your GDP budget on children. That's 6% for education, 3% for health. And India at the time said, no problem, we'll go beyond that. Actually today, India is less than 3% globally. So children got together with adults and they created a campaign which is 9 is Mine. And all over India, they've created children's parliaments and these are all very, very poor children, but they're supported by NGOs that are, in a way, replacing parental pastoral care, in a way, and also working away from the school environment, which is quite harsh, and the more traditional state-provided things which don't really help them, or they don't feel they're getting help. So that's my experience, and they're teenagers. So just an example, and they blossom. They really do blossom in the sense of if they find adults that are willing to support them, then things can turn around. And some of these kids were at the borderline of criminality, of all sorts of problems in their lives, of drugs and all sorts of problems, and they turn their lives around. It's possible. Yes?
In that example, you're saying that, I'm just wondering how it's intersected with human rights too, because it sounds like just their plain human rights are being violated.
Yes.
Well,
children's rights are being violated.
Yeah, right, but they're an addition to their
yes.
human rights, correct? So, like, in that system, how do you also then uphold their human rights as well as their rights as children? I guess I'm asking, are the NGOs doing that? Because I've worked in developing countries like Haiti, where if you're trying to improve if you're working with the NGO system but not improving the government system that's supporting the children and families, it's not necessarily going to be sustainable, or it's not going to be able to continue their flourishing, particularly if these NGOs leave. So I was just wondering, how then do you support
the sustainability?
Yeah.
It's difficult.
Yeah.
I'm not sure that I have all the answers to that one, but.
Or I guess I'm trying to say, how then their human rights are being violated even first, and then their rights as children are also being violated, then there needs to be, more action or more...
Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying. It's a global problem that needs to be looked at from very many different things, and I think that's where consortiums of NGOs need to come together that are providing different impact.
NGOs role to do this thing, it's the state, the government.
Yeah, but in a lot of countries there's a lot of corruption, there's a lot of problems. I mean, India is a country I know very well, and it's a rich country, but unfortunately that richness is not being distributed properly.
But the experience of being empowered to even do the 9 is Mine.
Yes.
that trickles down to empowering other people, and those people don't
Yeah.
forget the experience of being empowered to ask for change and to request change. But in fact, they will hopefully pass that down
Absolutely.
and keep that pressure
And
on.
children are taking the lead in some areas, because the difference, I think, in developing countries, where children have very little choice but to stand up. They don't have much choice but to stand up for their rights. In the Western world, we do an awful lot for children. We should do an awful lot more with children. But children in the developing world, they don't always, what I'm trying to say is that they don't have the support. So if they don't get together with some adults to help them, nothing will change. And so they're much more cluey about being advocates. We can learn, I've learned so much from Indian children of how campaigns are made. And the reason why I said, we create an event where we bring 50 nationalities together, because the children in Europe are learning a great deal from the children in India, in Latin America, in Africa. When they come and they mix together and they join their experience, the children from the developing world are far more advanced in their advocacy techniques, and they're teaching these children how to do it. I've seen a little boy from Zimbabwe, or was it Uganda? I can't remember, there was two of them. And one was from Zimbabwe, one was from Uganda. But anyway, one of them was going out to villages to teach young girls, he's 11, to teach young girls how to use sanitary towels. And this is a boy, and he's 11 years old. And that was his campaign, because his sister died from infection. So, these very difficult situations these children are living with, and they're becoming bad. But he didn't do it on his own. He went to an NGO and said, this is my problem, help me. I don't want other girls to go into that situation. And it's quite, powerful, these testimonies of these kids, what they go through. Of course, no one would want that to happen to children. I'm not saying that, well, thank God that's happened and therefore he's doing this. It's just a question that we have to learn from each other how to build strength and empowerment, and we can learn from each other in that respect. Any other reactions? But from this exercise, how did you find the exercise? Was it interesting?
Just going back to Jennifer's comment about being risk averse, I would say we're mostly risk averse around physical safety rather than that emotional safety or spiritual safety, because there's lots of times people will say, this is what I need to feel like I can be myself, whether it be gender expression or whichever, and the default is, but that would put you at risk.
Yeah.
But physical risk, not necessarily the cultural or the spiritual.
It just occurred to me, as adults, as a woman, adult, I'm thinking, what if I were 20 years younger? Or what if I were 40 years younger? As children, we always dream of when we are adults, what would happen, how great it is when I'm older, children say, or when I'm an adult. So here's a conflict of interests. We as adults would love to become younger and would love to go back. Children actually want to jump over this age gap and to become adults. What if we manage to meet somewhere in the middle point and somehow explain to the kids, it's great to be a child. That's one thing. And another thing is, children at any age are ready to pick up a responsibility and to really behave. And without boasting and just talking about my own grandson, but he was 5, and a girl in his daycare said, oh, I heard yesterday on the news the children in Haiti are in need. So these two 5-year-olds started talking with the kids in the group, and they started collecting money. So they saved over $100, so everyone brought, and they had this huge package of coins because most of them would bring like 25 cents. And the smart teacher took these two, brought them to the bank, and all together they came to the cashier with this package of coins, and they said, we want to donate to Red Cross to send the money to the children in Haiti. When you think about kids at 5, we don't think about them as being able to do anything, right? And they're thinking, just jumping like 10 years ahead or 20 years ahead. So I'm thinking that if we learn that children are able, and all we need, just let them be responsible at a certain place and give them this responsibility. And for us to stop dreaming of going backwards, because it's practically impossible today, but maybe just meeting at some point where all of us can feel a little younger, but at the same time having responsibilities as adults, learning how to be responsible.
Absolutely. And I would say to the positive side is that children do have a great deal of impact. So to go back to my 9 is mine story, a lot of these campaigns are having positive impact. And there are bad politicians, there are good politicians, but there are people who are implementing, they're getting the funds through. And a group of girls got together in one of the worst slums in Delhi, and they campaigned for sanitary conditions, good toilets basically, and they got the money. And with their voice and adults have been trying for years to campaign, and these kids got together and they did a very effective campaign, and they got the money, and they've got now the sanitary conditions that they need. So it's possible. Girls got together and refused to go to school if they didn't have proper sanitary conditions. So these are they sound very basic things, but these are fundamental dignity problems, and it can work. It can work. So tomorrow, I'm going to hand over to Tatiana now, but tomorrow will be the next stage of this little journey we're on, and then we'll have these 8 young people that will be with us, teenagers, and they're coming to share some of their stories, and you can interact with them. We're going to do this great technique which is called the human library. I don't know if any of you know what that's like, but it's like a library, but instead of having books, we've got human beings being books, and so you'll be able to read a lot of their stories tomorrow, and hopefully some of this stuff here will happen with the children. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
So consider we'll have 45 minutes to work together, or maybe a little more if you feel like this. So if I don't suggest to have a break right now, but if you need to go out just for a restroom, please feel free, okay? So what I started thinking about, because I was teaching history of education for years, Leo Tolstoy came to mind. And I'm not sure Leo Tolstoy is really well known as an educator here, clearly known as a writer. Who knows that Leo Tolstoy was actually a founder of a school? You know, great. And what he was doing in this school is pretty amazing. But what I want to refer to is an article which is entitled, listen to this, and this is coming from the world famous writer. The article is entitled, Who from Whom is Learning to Write? Peasant Children from Us, or We from Peasant Children? And he's serious. He's serious. And then the article is about a real situation. So he's giving the children, he was teaching literature in his school. Literature, Russian language, and drawing. So he is giving the children the task, the assignment, write an essay, a composition on this topic, which is a Russian proverb. And because the children were allowed, it was the first Russian-free school ever, and we're talking about the 19th century. And he gave them this assignment. They started writing, and they felt like not really working well. And one of the kids raised his hand and said, "And how about you, Leo? Why wouldn't you write and show us how?" And he, instead of saying, "Hello, I'm a teacher," he said, "Okay, I'll do it." So he's sitting at the teacher's table. Just think about this situation. He's a world-famous writer, right? The whole world knows that's one of the best. And he says to the peasant kids, he says, "Okay, I will do it." And he starts writing. And the kids seeing that he's struggling. He's struggling. They came up to him, they stood behind him and looking above into what he's writing, kids started commenting, saying, "No, that's not right. No, people don't do it like this in life. No, it should be totally different." And he, being world famous, instead of saying, "Hello, I know what I'm doing, I'm a writer," he says, "Okay, tell me how." And then they started dictating to him how to write a story. How about that? How many teachers you know who would allow their students say, "Okay, you tell me"? So he started writing this story the way they dictated to him, and he published it. And he says in the article, he says, "Here's a page which I wrote, and you compare to the brilliant way which children suggested and my dull way." I'm not quoting exactly, but it's like that. And he was not playing the game. He was not playing someone he was not. And another thing he was saying, in many articles he wrote about education, which I really loved, and that is again about children's rights. He's saying, the father, being a soldier, finally came home for a vacation, and he comes to school, and he sees his son drawing, and the father is so impressed that he starts calling his son, who knows German? So you know the difference between du and sie, which means du is informal, sie is formal. There is no difference in English, so you say you, formally, informally. In Russian, there is the same difference like in German. Ты, вы. Ты, that is informal, you say to the kid, and we, that is a polite form. I'm sure in Chinese there's a difference as well, or not. Yeah, there is. So the father, sitting there at the back of the classroom, watching his son drawing, started calling his son with this formal way out of respect to the way he was drawing. And that is a soldier father whose way of educating the child was, "Come here, you know, and you will know how to be." And all of a sudden, the father gets this respect. That's the influence which is possible in principle. So while listening to Jennifer and all of you talking, I'm thinking we need to add to the convention one more right. That is the right of children teach adults. Don't you think? how many times as children you felt, okay, if I were in that place, a teacher or a parent or whoever, I would have done it totally differently and it would have been right, but they, adults, have all the power today. Don't you think part of hostility which happens in this world happens because children don't have this right to teach us adults what to do? If they did, they could have stopped any time any teacher or parent or anyone say, listen, I have the right to teach you. Let me tell you how. But in our today's adult world, that's inappropriate to say the least, or extremely impolite, or absolutely not acceptable, right? And no teacher or parent would allow it. Or will, but that is like a different story. I'm talking about like regular situation, right? It doesn't happen. So how about children having rights, not only those which are in the convention, in one, in another convention, but also the right to teach adults? Think of this. Until it becomes a real right, maybe at least in the settings where you have the power to do it, maybe we can start practicing, you know. So now back to what we have. You have this PowerPoint. It starts with the next slide if you check 1924. If you bring up the handout, and we'll go through it quickly. It's in your folder. And we will talk about the history of the rights. And I just want to bring it up because it allows us to understand that everything which is so important was actually happening only in the 20th century. The whole thing, 20th century. So we're lucky if you think about progress in comparison with the previous history of mankind. Okay? So in 1924, and this is after Korczak wrote his rights, there came the first Geneva Declaration on the Rights of the Child. The woman who actually initiated this is this lady. And she started this movement and association, we would have said in the modern world, Save the Child, yeah, and Save the Children. And she was talking about what is impossible in the eyes of one person could be quite possible when you unite efforts. So because of her, there was that first convention, and it has only 4 rights. And you have that Geneva Declaration in your handouts. It's only 4. Can somebody read it real quick for us to remember? Who has it in front of you? 1924. We have it. Yes, please.
So the child must be given the means requisite for its normal development, both materially and spiritually. The child that is hungry must be fed. The child that is sick must be nursed. The child that is backward must be helped. The delinquent child must be reclaimed. The orphan and the slave must be sheltered. 3, the child must be the first to receive relief in times of distress. 4, the child must be put in a position to earn a livelihood and must be protected against every form of exploitation.
We can stop there.
There's a 5th too.
Yeah. So, is there anything which contradicts your today's understanding? How the rights are composed? How the language goes? Do you feel anything which does not really click with your today's understanding. What? Who would like to say? Claire?
Very prescriptive.
Prescriptive,
Even just the labels given to the children?
delinquent, yeah? What else? So to me it feels like, okay, let me give you a couple of gifts, yeah? But I'm the one who keeps the power, yeah? I'm giving you this, that, and that, but remember who is the authority here, right? That's how it feels. Is it different from the rights of the child which Korczak constructed, composed? Can you bring up any example of Korczak's rights, and that is practically the same time period which contradicts what or is very different in comparison with the Geneva Declaration? That one page we started with today?
Well, it's
From
children are actors in his
yes.
rights, whereas they're just objects of.
Absolutely. Children are actors. That's the major difference. Not to say how many different rights are provided, right? So further on in this PowerPoint, you'll see major stages, how it has been developed. Yes,
Just one thing,
Jennifer,
which hence the title, Save the Children. So
Yeah.
it was to say that it was sort of a benevolent, charitable act to save the children. And of course the organisation Save the Children have moved on a great deal. Their title doesn't actually match today what they actually do, because they're not working in that same way of that period. But it was what they didn't, Evelyn Jebb didn't have a vision that was working with children. It was more, we have to be benevolent adults and build a charity which is got to save children.
And I guess what I did, which I shouldn't have, I'm judging from the point of view of today what was happening 95 years ago. Okay. So clearly it's not objective or neutral. That is subjective and kind of criticizing, but still, if we look at it, it lacks. But it was the first declaration, which we need to celebrate as a fact, okay? In 1946, UNICEF was founded, which was a huge step up. The next is, I want you to see this person. He was part of the Polish delegation, although he has kind of German name, but he was from Poland. And he suggested, if you read it, that there should be this United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund. I frankly have to read it because I keep forgetting what the acronym UNICEF means, right? But that's the person who actually suggested it. Frankly speaking, only preparing for this presentation, I kind of learned about the person. So I wanted to show you this one. Then I thought it would be really maybe informative for you to learn about UNICEF Canada, because it didn't come immediately. It was founded in 1955. And here's the head today, David Morley, and the headquarters are in Toronto. Okay?
The organisation of UNICEF, the word fund is a key thing for UNICEF. It's a fundraising organisation mainly, but it acts like an NGO even though it's the United Nations. But the developing countries are directly linked or directly managed and governed by New York, by UNICEF New York. But in the developed world, like here in Canada, they're what are called national committees, and they're independent organisations that have a mandate from UNICEF. So they're not actually directly managed by New York. They're given that mandate, and it's almost like a franchise system, if you like. And their role mainly is to raise as much funds as possible to give to the developing world. Yeah, which is and they have a second mandate, which is to defend children's rights. But sometimes that becomes overtaken by the fundraising aspect.
I recently met with the woman who is the head of UNICEF United States. She's a big children's activist and advocate, and she's traveling all over the world. And she's talking incredibly passionately about how children in the developing countries, when receiving that stuck with me listening to her. She was talking about in a country which was in extreme poverty, and the child standing next to her was given a piece of cake. And the child was 3 years old, and you would think a hungry child would immediately put that cake into his mouth. But the actual situation was the child broke it into 2 pieces, turned and gave the second piece to the child who was next to him, which is quite a lesson for all of us, yeah? So the next, that is United Nations General Assembly passes this Declaration of Human Rights, which has this specifically Article 25. And that's another step up. Now then comes 1959, and that's kind of a new level of a Declaration of Children's Rights, which provides these rights here highlighted in red: rights to education, play comes into our view finally, supportive environment, and health care. It's still quite we are giving, they are taking from us, but at least we acknowledge the children's nature. You want to say something?
No.
No? Okay. So that is another step up, 1959, okay? Then I wanted to give you a couple of other ideas. You have it all in your PowerPoint. I don't want to take time on this. So then comes 1979, when the next step was taken, and finally 1989, when the convention, which we celebrate 30 years this year, came into power. So if you compare, you have this document of the convention. If I give you 5 minutes, you take this document, the convention 1989, we were using it today, and you take that one page from both sides, Korczak's rights, take one right from Korczak, find the right provided in the convention which corresponds, and try to compare, is the convention really providing this right, or there are some strings attached as us adults, or the convention really gives everything the adult world should. Am I clear? Oh, you don't have it?
I don't.
Yeah? Oh.
I know that Susan Leal from our office, I think I saw her name there. Can I just borrow hers for
Sure,
today?
sure. And the papers are here. I'll just check it, yeah. Okay. So all the documents are here. Alice, if you can pass it, please. And the books, yeah. So pick any right from Korczak and find the related right in the convention, and let's talk about it.
I do, yeah.
Ready? Yeah?
Just one right, right?
Yeah, one right, absolutely. Who else is ready? Bronwyn is ready, Claire is ready? You, Judith, yeah? Jacqueline?
I can't find the right I've chosen.
Okay, okay, no, that's fine. We still have time.
Just a quick word. We talk about 1989. It took 10 years of negotiation to, almost 11 years of negotiation to actually get the agreement on the convention with all the nation states. And Poland was the key mediator in that. And it's not by accident that the Berlin Wall came down in 1989 as well. There was a lot of east-west polarization problems going on in the background, and the countries that were the most difficult were not the eastern countries but the western countries, because it was proposed by behind the Iron Curtain at that time to have a convention.
Yeah, and there's still one which is extremely difficult.
But it was more Thatcher and Reagan that were stopping the advancement in one way.
So from 1978 to 1989?
Sorry?
No, from 89 to 2000 almost.
Ah, before it got,
Yeah. But if you look up at the last slide, 196 countries ratified, except for the United States until today.
It's the only country that hasn't
Yeah,
ratified.
that is the only country in the world, which is pretty amazing. And the reasoning coming from the United States is that the legal system of the country contradicts the provisions of the convention, that practically it's not ratified because then there will be a contradiction in the legality of the issue, which is, yeah. Don't let me go along this line. Okay,
It's
so
because of
let's...
the death penalty, right?
What's that?
It's because of the death penalty in the States that they don't want to ratify.
Because of what?
Death penalty.
Oh, the death penalty? No, I don't think so. No, I think there are other reasons. And one of the reasons is the third world countries developed the convention, why we, as one of the most developed countries, should follow something which was prescribed by those who are less developed.
There's also a huge lobby in the southern states which believe what they call family rights, which is almost like Roman rights, where the father should have the right to decide.
Yeah, and the child is practically the object which can be manipulated back and forth, and that's the property of the family. How come that there would be an international document which would allow the child decide what and how?
It's a fundamentalist Christian sort of lobby, but they've got lots of money. So it's a bit like the guns lobby in the United States. They hold the politicians.
Because that's what they say here. In that book, it says that it's because of the death penalty. They don't want to remove the death penalty.
I think that may be what they said at the time.
And gun control as well.
Quite interesting.
Children have the right to safety, that means you need gun control.
Yeah,
There's all
yeah.
sorts of really universal health care.
But if you think in terms of gun control, if you think of incredible child's agency, which grew so much in the United States because of that, where children go out into the streets and chant, "Give us the right to live, stop shooting, stop the gun," just breaks my heart. And we're still there, you know. We still have this provision in the Constitution, which is over 200 years old, which is incredible. Why can't we change it? Because there's a huge financial lobby, of course. There's a huge production of guns, which gives billions of dollars. And when money speaks, you know, then everything else does not. Because of that, I was talking yesterday in the morning about we need to step up and match with children's agency. We're not there yet as adults. Children are in many ways ahead of us, which is shameful, which is embarrassing. And before we actually do it, I don't think much would happen. Anyways, let's go to the rights. Claire?
Sorry, no, I'm just thinking about the U.S.
Yeah.
Physical punishment of kids was banned in many countries, but isn't the U.S. the one that did not?
Corporal punishment is still allowed in 19 states officially. It's not that it's being used often, no.
Right.
But it's still officially allowed. And you probably know that in the United States, education is only within the legislature of the state, not the national legislature, as in many countries. And because of that, 19 states still allow corporal punishment, which actually blows my mind away, but at the same time, it is what it is. It's allowed. So let's go to the rights. What did you find, and what is the match or no match?
Okay,
Yes.
Mm-hmm. I found, okay, so what one do you want first?
Korczak. Yeah.
Okay. The child has the right to be himself or herself.
Mm-hmm.
I matched it with Article 8, I don't know if this is correct, but states parties undertake to respect the right of the child to preserve his or her identity, including nationality, name, and family relations as recognized by law without unlawful interference. Mm-hmm. Where a child is legally deprived of some or all of the elements of his or her identity, states parties shall provide appropriate assistance and protection with a view to reestablishing speedily his or her identity.
Okay. I would like to hear your opinions on how you feel about preserving the identity of a child and indigenous children in Canada, how it was allowed or not allowed to preserve their identity, and if it was not allowed, what was the reasoning?
Well, in residential school,
Yeah.
the purpose was to assimilate indigenous children into settler culture, community.
Because?
Because
What was the official reasoning?
because they were savages. They were lesser than people. They were not as equal. They were inferior to Judeo-Christian white settlers.
Yep, Judeo.
Sorry, the
Christian.
So it was to take the Indian out of the child.
So don't you think the reasoning which was coming from some people who kind of sincerely believed that's for the better of these children was like, we, the white people, know better, we are better, we are more cultured and more educated, and we will let these kids, we will show them how to go up into our culture, and that's for their best, in their best interests.
That's how some churches put it.
Yeah.
Now they find documents now that say it wasn't really about that. It was more
Of course.
about taking land.
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
of course. But that's how it was explained, right? So when a child is deprived of his or her national identity, what happens next? Because that's what was happening, right? What happens next? When a person is born one way and then deprived of it.
We dehumanize them,
Dehumanizes, yeah.
so they are not themselves anymore.
Yeah.
They lose their own self-confidence and respect.
So we practically ruin their lives at a very early age, right? They become adults, they live their lives, but we definitely diminish the quality of that life right away, straight at the beginning.
But we just mentioned it earlier, corporal punishment is legal in Canada too.
Is it? In schools?
No, not anymore.
No, not in
Anyone
At
schools.
home you can.
But anyone in a position of power or like a teacher,
Yes, some
Is
restrictions.
not allowed, is not
But still
allowed.
it's
Yeah.
legal, so
It's legal except to the extreme. Like if they can prove that it was
there is restrictions.
it was
It's
not
legal, which is
what's the word?
amazing
Abusive.
to my mind.
It's not equal to the infraction. So
Okay.
extreme punishment, or it's not balanced with what the consequence is. to
Okay,
the extreme.
in your professional lives or in your lives, did you meet with the people who were deprived of their national identity? How did it feel? What was your feeling, impression? You talked with these people. What is it? Alyssa?
Well, I worked with clients who were Indigenous, and they lived at the residential school, and one of them in particular had such a physiological response to Caucasian skin tones, so like she couldn't even be in the same room with men, Caucasian men. Like if they had blonde hair, it was worse. If they had blue eyes, it was worse. Like it was so extreme, it caused her such trauma. Yeah. So we were in like a substance misuse rehabilitation kind of program, and so we had to be very flexible in how we worked with her, and just like had to make like constant changes to make it as comfortable and a safe fit environment for her. It was very challenging. It was just heartbreaking.
Because she had that
Because she had been
emotional-
abused, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, so
Okay.
if someone looked the same, then yeah.
Any other experiences you want to share? Claire?
The majority of my patients have been traumatized by the residential schools, whether it was themselves or a family member, and there's this intergenerational trauma that's going on. And so I've had many experiences. I don't know what I could really, if I could choose one that was more impactful, but there's just this mistrust that's there, and this suspicion.
That's an important word, mistrust, yeah.
And so, being able to just, not make any assumptions and create this safe space, and, to be able to be who they are in the reality that they live in and what they grew up with.
Okay. There's an incredible documentary I would strongly recommend. It's on YouTube. It's called The Danger of a Single Story. Has anyone, yeah? Do you want to talk about it? Do you remember it?
Yeah, it's a really good TED Talk, but it's talking about this woman who is from Africa, talks about how stereotypes may be based in some truth, but the problem is it's not the full picture, it's not the full story. So even though you may have one person's experience, it reinforces beliefs or things like that, that you're no longer able to see outside of that stereotype when you accept them.
What stuck with me, she is a famous writer now. I think she's from Nigeria, if I remember correctly. So she was raised in a middle-class family, quite wealthy. Her father was professor and her mother, I don't remember, professor as well, or teacher. Anyways, so she was not deprived of education and anything. But her parents were raising her on the Western culture, living in Nigeria. And she started writing, that was most amazing. She started writing when she was a child, like 7, 8 years old, remember? And her first stories were about blonde-haired girls with blue eyes and walking in the garden with lots of apples. So she was not blonde, she didn't have blue eyes, and she never saw apple gardens. But she was writing about that because that was the story her parents imposed on her when she was a child. Then she graduated high school, she came to the United States, to the university, and in the dorm, the first question her mate there in the room, yeah, with whom she shared the room, asked was, how come you speak English so well? Like, seriously? I was studying English all my life, that was my language, I was speaking English. How come you know American singers? How come you know American writers? So she's talking about this danger of a single story. And if you think about this metaphor, this single story is one of the incredible obstacles all of us put either on our own way, because we as teachers believe this is the only way, and I will follow this way, and I will bring you children regardless of whether you want it or not, because I'm sure this is the right way. And she brings to our attention the risks of that and the beauty of the mosaic of the world, which could be so different, and because of it, so beautiful, because we have so many differences in this one world together. Now imagine for a second the world becomes all white, all blue eyes, all blonde hair, and everyone behaves same way. We will die of being bored by day 2, because no one wants to see in your partner or neighbor, anyone, your same image, right? We want this difference. Whether we accept it or not, we do want it. Would you agree with that? It brings the beauty.
Maybe day 3.
Maybe day 3, okay. Okay.
But we'll also die because biologically we're weakened.
Exactly, exactly, exactly. This too, absolutely. But that's the thing. On the one hand, kind of, as human beings, biological creatures, we understand. At the same time, we try to impose on indigenous people, on people who are minorities, that they're not good enough, but we are good enough. We will show them how the world works. That's what Nazism is, what fascism is, like what Hitler thought that that's the best. Aryan nation is the best. And let's eliminate all those gypsies, Jews, Slavic nations only as workers, because that's the best.
I just have a comment in terms of my niece asked me what was race, because they were learning about racism.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
she's how old?
She's 5.5.
Okay.
And I'm writing lots of books around different social justice topics.
Yes.
And I said it's something people made up because there actually isn't different races.
Yeah.
It's a social idea. It's people who needed to put into groups and have a sense of belonging. And she was absolutely dumbfounded. She was like, "Oh, but they're a different color than me." I'm like, "Yeah, still human race." Because that didn't happen until, I think, the 1600s, that there was racism.
You know, what really struck me, there's another documentary about a psychological experiment. The children who have a black skin, they're given different tests, like here's a white doll, a drawing, a black doll, a brown doll, and questions like which doll is better? Or which kind of friend you would choose with what kind of skin? What do you think the black-skinned kids choose? Exactly. The white doll or the white friend. Why? And some of them answer to the camera and they show it. If you are interested, I can find this documentary. And the black kids say, oh, one girl said, oh, because black is ugly, and she's black herself. So that's the identity she's growing, like, I'm ugly. Now imagine you feel about yourself, you're ugly, how you are growing up. As a child, as a teenager, as a woman, you're ugly. From inside up, being a child. You choose a white doll, you choose a white friend because this is better. That's quite powerful, yeah? And this is something we need to remember. When we deprive people from early age from their national identity or their color, we teach them your color is wrong, but sorry, you are what you are, but you need to be around white people because that's better. Then what are we doing? So another right in from the convention, please. Who found something? Alyssa, yeah.
So the child has the right to education.
Yeah, that's important.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I matched it with Article 28 in the convention.
Yeah, exact same thing. Yeah.
States parties recognize the right of the child to education and with a view to achieving this right progressively and on the basis of equal opportunity.
Okay. Okay. What else? Sigrid?
I have one in, I think, Article 12
Uh-huh.
from the Declaration, and then from Janusz. It is, I think I matched it with the child has the right to be taken seriously. So Article 12 says, states parties shall assure the child is capable of forming his or her own views, the right to express those views freely in all matters affecting the child, the views of the child being given due weight in accordance with the age and maturity of the child. And then subsection 2 or section 2 of the article just goes with more judicial and administrative proceedings that the child has the right to be heard.
But in principle, it's the same right.
Yeah, it's just more. They take for Janusz's declaration, for Korczak's declaration, it's more of a blanket statement as opposed to the one declaration is a little bit more qualified with the age and maturity of the child. The weight in which you consider it you have to consider the age and maturity.
Okay. Ronald?
Well, I had Article 12 too, but I could say the child has the right to optimal conditions in which to grow and develop, and to me that would be Article 2, the best interests.
Okay. Okay. Best interests of the child. Okay. Anyone else? Michelle?
I'm just curious if the right to die prematurely is in there.
Is it? What do you think? Is it in the convention?
It's actually the opposite in there.
It's the right to life.
So let's talk about the right to die. Elisa?
Well, I know in determining doctor-assisted suicide in contrast with human rights, it was determined that the right to life is not an obligation. So wouldn't it be applied similarly?
Well, in a way, if the child is sick. If the child is sick, yeah. But when Korczak actually wrote this right, it was mostly because the conditions, medical conditions, were really poor and bad, and he knew that many medical conditions, diseases were not curable, and instead of putting the child through a horror of different treatments and knowing that the child will still die, maybe let the child pass away, which yeah, sounds pretty horrible, yeah.
So it was also probably as well to do with the fact that Korczak lived through 4 wars, which is incredible. I mean, you know, children are the first victims of the horrors of war.
Yeah, he went through Russian-Japanese War, and then First World War. He was in China, in Manchuria, during the first conflict, military conflict. So he saw how much children suffer.
So he basically said, you know, children have the right to...
if they decide, yeah?
To have the dignity of dying correctly.
Yeah, yes.
I've worked a little bit in pediatric palliative care with Connect Place Children's Hospice, and then also just even in adult palliative care. When people, you know, are dying, they find it hard to die when their caregiver is there, like when their family is there, and that kind of spoke to me in that way, that, you know, parents are hanging on so tight to their kids, they don't want to let them go. And I worked in neonatal ICU as well, and we saw babies saved that wasn't necessarily what quality of life were they're going to have, and that's such a tough decision as a parent, and that these kids, you know, have a right to die if, you know, that's their time and their...
Absolutely. I just wanted to say that that context is a big thing. There's the historical context, there's the geographical context, and there's the economic context of children's lives and changes. So just to go back to the exercise that we did here with provision and protection, I did the same exercise exactly as we did today with the Indian children. And a lot of these things, some of the things that you've talked about, they talked about. But they added on things, you know, I've talked about, you know, there's an obsession with toilets, and there's a reason for that in India. You know, in provision, you wouldn't think of putting in provision, we need decent toilets. But in India, it's the first thing that went up there. So, you know...
the cultural and historical context.
So I don't think I answered very correctly. Unfortunately, she's gone, but when she said, you know, well, that's human rights and child rights, actually they are child rights. You know, the right to provision, good provision, including, you know, the right to have good medical assistance and good care and everything are fundamental. But whether we come from, you know, a rich, well-provided environment or a very poor one will determine what our emphasis will be in terms of provision.
Jane, you wanted to say something?
I mean, I found this one the hardest too as a parent, but I think it's key to everything that he writes about. It puts the child in the center.
Yeah.
Takes the focus off me and puts the focus on the other. And we learn, you know, when our parents die, it's sad, but it's expected. And so it's easier to say to your parent, it's okay, when you're ready, you can let go. I think it would break my heart to say that to my daughter, but why would I not give her that if I expected that for me?
So in terms of the logic of children's rights, if you say A, you go all the way to Z. And you need to go all this way, right? If you provide the right to respect, the right to dignity, then you provide the right to dignity in death as well. At the same time, as adults, as parents, as grandparents, who wants it? Who would even think of that? That's